Howdy, friends, and welcome to the Storyfield. This is a podcast where we talk about business, faith, and life in general.
Okay, so here's the deal. We want you to be encouraged. We want you living in hope. This life we live is complex. It's hard at times. At the Storyfield, you will find great stories of normal people just like us who will inspire you. Our goal is that you leave encouraged, inspired, and excited to move forward in life. But before we get started, one thing though, if you're listening and you find yourself really hopeless right now, send us an email at hope@thestoryfield.com so we can pray for you. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get started.
Hey, Storyfield. Today we are excited to have Jonathan Tepper on the show. Jonathan, we are super pumped. Thank you for making time. We're going to talk about what you wrote, which is incredibly done. So I'm grateful that you're a guest today.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you very much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
You bet. So I want to kind of get right into it. I'm really fascinated by your new book. And really the title caught my attention, honestly, to be honest with you. I mean, and it's called Shooting Up, a Memoir of Loss, Love, and Addiction, where you discuss your childhood, where your parents took you, 7-year-old you, along with a few brothers, to Madrid during the height of the heroin and associated AIDS epidemic. And it's an incredible book, but I got to be honest with you, it feels heavy. You know,
Yes,
real heavy.
It starts out very innocent, as it was, just a innocent kid and handing out flyers to junkies, and nothing seemed particularly dangerous, and everything actually seemed like a bit of an adventure at the time. And I think it was only later with the passing of the years, and then sort of it comes out obviously in the story, where as the addicts become infected and almost all shared needles. And Spain was the one country in the world where most of the AIDS cases came from intravenous drug use, from heroin sharing needles, whereas in the US in the 80s, it started out as predominantly a gay disease, even though it started becoming much more heterosexual late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And then in Africa, it was very much a heterosexual disease, but Spain was very much sort of heroin users. And my parents started a drug rehab center helping heroin addicts. And so, it was the 80s and early 90s went along. It became very real. And then, certainly was that loss of innocence, and that's sort of what the book is about, the sort of love and loss in the title.
Well, that's why I feel it. Well, let's back up, because at the Storyfield, we like to kind of start at a childhood, and we want to get the background and then to the point you get there. So where did you grow up? Because you went from Mexico to Spain.
Yes.
So did you grow up in Mexico, or?
Well, I was still pretty young when they left. My parents were Christian missionaries, and they had been doing work in Mexico. My father was a university chaplain, so really wanting to work with students, the way that you have in the U.S., like InterVarsity, Campus Crusade, and things like that. But he was doing it sort of on his own, and started a church in Puebla at the Universidad de las Américas, the University of the Americas. And then he and my mother felt that God had called them to move to Spain to do the same thing. So
was there a moment, a story behind that? Like,
and in the book I talk about how I grew up in a family where God talks back. Many people sort of talk to God, or they felt that God spoke to them, and I think it was in probably one of those I don't know if it's morning devotional or evening when my parents would read and pray, generally often when we were sort of either still asleep or not, so that way they got peace and quiet. But they felt that God had spoken to them. So I don't know that it was any sort of miraculous,
for sure. Yeah, I'm just curious if there was.
God called them to go, and then they moved to Madrid in 1983. I was 7 at the time, and the first year, probably a year and a half of being in Madrid, and I talk about this a bit in the first chapter. My father went to talk to university students, and none of them had any interest in what he was talking about at all. But because my parents were poor missionaries, they'd settled in San Blas, which was a neighborhood, rent was cheap, and it had one of the highest rates of heroin use and juvenile crime in Europe.
Gosh, it's unbelievable. Did they talk to you? I'm just curious. I want a little bit more of the backstory before we get into the neighborhood. Do you recall? I mean, 7's pretty young, but do you recall having a conversation like, "We're going here. Do you want to go here?" Or is it like, Here's
Oh
our
no,
next
when you're a
adventure type of
missionary
thing.
kid,
Yeah.
yeah, when you're a missionary kid, you don't do any deciding for yourself.
Yeah. It's like, here's where we're going.
Exactly. Yeah. So I
And
do
then,
remember them telling us we were moving, but you don't get a vote as a kid.
yeah, that makes sense. And you were one of four brothers and the
Yes.
second
So,
in the birth order.
yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
there was my older brother David, myself, and David was 2 years older than me. Peter was almost 2 years younger than me, and then Timothy was 5 years younger than me.
Yeah. And I want to talk about him too. So, okay. So here's a 7-year-old kid moves to Spain. Um, and they send you out in the neighborhood, in the parks and the streets with some pamphlets talking about Jesus, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
So,
so the pamphlets were obviously trying to offer help for the addicts, which is
yeah,
to say that before my parents started a drug rehab center, it was mainly sending people to other centers. And there was very little help for heroin addicts of any kind, whether it was government run or not at the time. There were some Christian centers further north and south. So these were sort of Christian pamphlets, but they also, were inviting them to come to our home for, my parents would have like a Friday night meeting. And then they would then send them off to drug rehab centers, and my parents would take them. And so I remember, we did dozens and dozens. I didn't go on all of them, but my father counted about 63 trips to taking people to rehabs outside of Madrid before the drug center actually started.
yeah. And we'll get into the drug center. I really want to hear about that. But do you recall that time? I mean, what was like, like, I think about putting myself in those shoes as a kid walking around because I mean, I feel some like nervousness just even like thinking about like, I mean, I don't know. Did you feel danger? Like, I mean, was there a lot of dangerous situations? Like you said,
Um,
there was needles on the ground and like,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like I think when you're a kid, everything sort of feels relatively normal. It's only later in life when you realize that most people don't necessarily or haven't shared your experiences or have grown up in different
yeah.
environments. You realize just how odd your own childhood or my childhood is in this case.
Mm.
And there was some danger, in the sense that like there was a gypsy camp that was behind our house, and I always regarded them with sort of fear and admiration, where they clearly lived by their own rules and had their own
Yeah.
internal codes.
Yeah.
And, you didn't want to like mess with the gypsy kids because you thought that like, some of them did steal. Obviously, tons of the Spanish kids are in the
Yeah.
neighborhood stole too, but there's some fear there. So we'd always go together as brothers. And then handing out flyers to addicts. My father told us, and I think we internalized it, was like the addicts might hurt each other, but they weren't going to hurt little kids. Like
Oh,
we
okay.
didn't have money, we didn't have drugs, like there wasn't anything for them,
Yeah.
to do with us.
Yeah.
So it was much more, I think, like a bit of an adventure, at least for my brothers and me, going out and handing out flyers.
Yeah. Were they pretty receptive to just the conversations and the
Uh,
possible need for help?
so some of them, yes, others no. They'd like tell you to get lost, or they'd say things like, that they're going to slit you if they just wanted you to leave.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have stabbed us or done anything, but it's just sort of like, telling someone to F off and things like
Yeah.
that.
Uh-huh.
But many of them really did want to get off drugs and really did need help, and so they were receptive. And often, if they were, I'd take them to come back and talk to my dad. And we generally didn't stray too far away. It's not like, we went half a mile away handing out flyers. We were generally
Yeah.
like, 100
Yeah.
feet, 200 feet from my parents,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, it was really just trying to help people get off drugs and generally inviting them to our home.
Yeah. Golly, man. What an experience. Um, how did how did just as you kind of process it back now that you're an adult looking back, and I don't know if there's any one right answer for sure, but what did you notice of like what kind of led people to get into that situation,
Into drugs.
into drugs and,
So I
or
think that Spain at that point in time, and I try to make it, I cut back. I had quite a bit more in the first draft of the book, and I cut it back a bit because I wanted the book to be a memoir that was engaging and drew the reader in, rather than like a dry discussion of the history of Madrid or drugs
for
or anything
sure.
like that, which is interesting to me, but not necessarily to the
Yeah.
average reader. And I do think that was a very particular point in time in Spain where they had a lot of people had migrated to Madrid in like the recent decades, and then they had built a lot of new social housing there to house people who came from sort of small towns outside of Madrid. So you had this sudden influx of people, and you had a lot of families back then. Wasn't a very developed social security net, and in poorer countries and poorer places, your kids are your security net, and so they had a lot of kids. And so if you combine having these sort of new housing developments with a lot of kids and, relatively high unemployment, they're going to have a lot of time on their hands to get up to things.
Yeah.
And then in 1975, Francisco Franco, was the dictator, died. And so before, heroin and drugs were not at all plentiful. They'd put people in jail, shoot them. And afterwards, they sort of decriminalized a lot of drugs. And suddenly you had this sort of wave of drugs going into parts of Spain. And I think it was a sort of like a combination of these factors, I think, that led to a very high rate of drug addiction in the peripheral neighborhoods in Madrid.
Oh my gosh. And y'all were right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Did you see some people recover?
Yeah, no, quite a lot.
Go ahead,
addict,
John.
Yeah, so the story recounts the first addict to enter the program. Many addicts were getting off when they were going off to other centers. My parents were taking them, to like Tepper and a few others. And then they would invite their friends there, and so they would go. But once Betel, the center that my parents started was called Betel, which is sort of like Bethel, House of God, in Spanish. And the first addict was Raul Gasto, and he moved into an apartment, and there was Lindsay McKinsey, who was an Australian missionary working with my parents. So Lindsay was living with Raul. Raul then invited 8 of his friends in, so you had like 8 men living with Lindsay.
Oh, wow.
8th floor apartment building, and it was clearly not zoned for that or anything like that. It was just men living together. Neighbors naturally started complaining that they didn't want a sort of informal drug rehab running in their building. So they went and found a farm near the airport back then in Barajas, and then they had about 30 men living on the farm. So it was just exploded because there was so much need for help to get off heroin, and that was really how the center started in 1985. And Raul became like an older brother to my brothers and me.
Yeah, I know. I was reading in about Raul, so I want to hear a little bit more about the rest of his story. So did he loop your parents in at the same time? Like, they were all part of the farm and the.
Yeah, so my parents kept the apartment. My parents didn't move into the farm, but we'd go out very frequently to visit. My father would go out and give the devotionals frequently. We would go out and spend time with the men. We'd go play soccer with them, and I have a chapter in there. It seemed this sort of idyllic life, going out with like big older brothers, and like uncles, basically spending time with them. And so you really got to know them. And they're just wonderful people. And then, obviously didn't know it at the time, but like obviously a lot of that entire generation became HIV positive, from sharing needles.
How did your parents communicate with you about that? I mean, I was reading a little bit about that as well. It seems like nearly everybody who was in the program was HIV positive.
So I remember it very vividly, which is why I have and obviously some of the dialogues have to be, no one has a photographic memory, and you have to sort of recreate the dialogues as best you can. And what I've tried to do is capture the spirit of that. But I do remember them telling us about HIV very vividly, because we had been out playing too late, and we came in, and I thought my parents were going to punish us for staying out too late, because they called us into the living room. So we all like filed into the living room thinking that we're going to get told off for coming home late. And what they really were doing was calling us into the living room to tell us that there was a HIV virus that was being spread via needles, and that a lot of the addicts or some of the addicts might have it. And at that stage, most of the addicts hadn't actually tested themselves, so it wasn't clear. We knew that it was there, we just didn't know who was HIV positive or not. And it was only then, over the coming years, that people individually started testing themselves. And then at that stage, it was sort of concerning enough, in the sense that there were quite a lot were testing positive, that then the center started encouraging everyone who came in to immediately go and get tested.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and I don't even know. I'm just putting myself in your parents' shoes a little bit too, thinking, here they are connected with a rehab center. I mean, presumably not a lot of medical background and all that. So
yeah.
Like,
no, my father studied economics at Cambridge, got his MBA at Harvard, so not the normal missionary background. And he had religious experience. For sure. And then, my mother, she had a degree in education. It was not a medical degree. So it really was sort of, totally new territory for them. And actually, I think most doctors in the 80s were relatively unfamiliar with it unless they were AIDS specialists, whether it was working like in New York or San Francisco with the gay community, or some doctors in Madrid who specialized working with heroin addicts or the gay community.
Hey, y'all. I just want to make an observation. When I see someone going through a legal situation, it seems like there are way too many unknowns. Well, the Allen firm provides legal guidance so that you can make a great decision, come to a resolution, and be at peace. For more information about the Allen firm, visit allenlawfirm.com.
Oh my gosh. What does it look like when somebody was, I guess, detoxing or getting off? Or, I mean, did you get a lot of firsthand, kind of in your face experiences like that as well?
Yeah, so I think so. So a lot of Hollywood, has these sort of very exaggerated
Yeah.
versions of detoxing, and there's like I remember watching Frank Sinatra. I think it's a Man with the Golden Arm, where he's like just shaking and violently getting
Yeah.
off heroin, and I thought like that's not really the way it happens. I think you definitely they have like aches and pains and sort of feel cold sweats and
Yeah.
sometimes a little nauseous, but it like any drug addiction, there's a half-life to it, and they get over it in a matter of days or a week. And the real issue that causes the long-term addiction isn't just the physical side. It's like smoking, right? Like if you quit smoking, the question is, why do you then 2 or 3 weeks go back to it? And obviously you have the triggers, which are your friends, the environment, the stress, or whatever thing that causes you to seek solace in that drug. That's the thing that drives the addiction more than the physical side of it. And it's not saying physical isn't powerful, but once you've gone through that withdrawal, it's the other things that keep pulling you back.
Yeah. How'd they keep them? Where did they live at the farm for a certain amount of time and just try to keep them from that second phase of, where you could really get victory?
Yeah, so the men, and then eventually they started a women's center too. The men who lived on the farm, there wasn't money really from donations. There wasn't any city government grants or things like that either. So the way that they paid the bills was basically by running businesses, and then all the money from these businesses, secondhand furniture stores, painting teams, and so on, paid for free drug rehab. And so part of the rehabilitation process itself was and still is, the center is now in 20 countries with about 2,000 addicts living in it, is running these businesses. So they reacquire discipline, a sense of dignity, and worth. And so it's really giving them skills, and then sort of pride in that they're managing these businesses and doing that.
It's a pretty brilliant model, really. And you said 20 countries,
Yes.
2,000 people living in them, rehabbing. I mean, it's a big impact. Hey, talk to me about the story of Raul again. Like track him out, because you became really good friend with him. You said it was kind of like an uncle almost, and track out like his path in life and kind of what happened with him, and then phase that into like, how did you deal? I'm assuming y'all were around kind of face to face with a lot of loss and death and grief, and I really want to like see how you handled that. How just your
Certainly.
thoughts on it,
Yeah, so Raul was like so close. He would spend a lot of time in my home that he was almost even more like an older brother than like an uncle.
Really?
So many of the men in the farm, like I didn't know them that well, and they were, most of them were 10 to 15 years older than us.
Okay.
And Raul, we became very close to him. He would like take us out to play soccer, take us to, in Madrid, in Spain, everyone's obsessed with soccer, football.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would take us to the Santiago Bernabeu to watch Real Madrid play. And so he really was very much like an older brother. He also was the first addict, and he was charismatic. His nickname in Spanish was El Tocho, which is stocky. He was like,
the stocky
big,
one, yeah.
Yeah, he was a big, strong guy, and people feared him rightly. He was a bit of a disciplinarian in the center. My father was probably erring more on the side of grace, but people absolutely loved and admired him. And it was really only so the center started with him moving into Lindsay's apartment in '85. And then he got married and had a child in '89. And then it was in that process where he, like about a year before, had gotten, when he was getting married, had taken a blood test and found out that he was HIV positive. And so he married Jenny Scantlebury, who was a missionary from New Zealand. And then Raul had 2 daughters. And it was in the late 80s, early 90s that a lot of the addicts in the program started dying. And so it was a death sentence because, today, most people, at least in the developed world and the United States, do not die from AIDS. And that's because in 1995, they came out with the cocktail, as they call it, the sort of highly active antiretroviral therapy or HART. And so, now there's hope and people don't even think about AIDS. But back then, if you tested HIV positive, it was 100% certain you're going to die. And the only question is when. And the average incubation period was about 5 years. So Raul, and it can go up to 14 years. So it doesn't mean you're going to die in 5. You could die at 7 or 9 or 14.
And Raul got that a couple years after he was married. The death sentence. Yeah.
And so we knew that he was HIV positive, and then he got sick in 1990 pretty badly and lost quite a lot of weight. And then it became very real, right? For me, certainly realizing that we could lose him. And then he would go in and out of the hospital for a period after that. And then he died in September of 1995. I was in college at the time. And so parts of the book are really about my friendship with him. And it's very strange because in the book, obviously you have loss. My family sort of suffered a tragic loss as well. With AIDS, it's sort of it's coming. It's not like a car accident or something else where there's, it blindsides you. And so you really do have to stare death in the face as it's approaching. And that was something that my high school years were often visiting him in Ramon y Cajal, which was the main hospital with the infectious diseases ward, and him and a lot of other friends. And so that was some of my more powerful childhood memories.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about him and walking into those and just I'm assuming you just saw him physically just go down to nothing and it's just painful. Yeah.
Yeah, there was you could tell obviously how people were and sometimes people died very quickly, but other times, you could watch the progression primarily through weight loss, right? Like you knew whether they were in the sort of final stages or not. And it's, and then their defense and their T cell count would go down. And so it was very evident if you went to church. And there was a Dutch documentary crew that came in and did a documentary on the church in the drug-rehab center. And we had no idea how they would cover it, but they picked the title, Half the Church Has AIDS. And if you did go to church, you could very definitely tell that our church was different.
Unstuck Coaches hates it when movement and progress in a person's life or business is stuck, or frozen, or slowed, or just stopped altogether. Well, we have found a solution. Unstuckcoaches.com. They offer a variety of coaching services to get you or your business moving again. Check out unstuckcoaches.com.
Wow, I know. I know your parents were called, but kind of one of the questions that was coming to mind as I was thinking about it is why in the world did they go? I mean, this is a story about compassion too, but why did they say yes to that?
I think if you look at the Bible and you look at Jesus's example and you look at the Sermon on the Mount and then the parables and then the various incidents that are recounted, he spent quite a lot of time with healing the sick, and he spent quite a lot of time with people who at the time were the pariahs and the social outcasts, whether it was Samaritans, whether it was with Romans, who were not particularly liked, obviously, by viewed as an occupying power by the Jews, tax collectors. And so that was really what Jesus did. And I think that if you, looked at the 1980s, heroin addicts and the HIV positive and people with AIDS were certainly the outcasts, and people didn't want to spend time with them.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's complete. It's the gospel lived out for real, for real. And that's what I feel like a lot of this, I catch the word just compassion. Did you come away from the experience? I kind of wanted to ask you about just like the experience overall, but like from your childhood with the sense of compassion or the sense that your parents just had a lot of compassion. I mean, that word just keeps stirring around.
Very much. I think that I feel very fortunate that I was able to grow up watching my parents, and I think that and at the very end of the book, in the epilogue, I have a quote from Arthur Ashe, and he said that true heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It's not the urge to surpass others at whatever cost, but it's the desire to serve others at whatever cost. And I think that my parents, my mother died a couple of years ago, but my father, 79, still working in the drug rehab center, wants to do it till the day he dies. And I think true heroism is like watching, him and then all the people in the drug center day after day, showing love and compassion to other people. And that I think that really is the story.
Yeah, oh, man, it's amazing. But on the family, I want to talk about, a couple, because you've had some serious family trauma and stuff. But first, how do you think your experience growing up as a child, and this is kind of a hard question, like down there at all, do you, as you look back on it, was it hard? Was it good? Was it bad?
Um,
Like how do you process it? Because I mean, just for me, kind of reading, getting into the book a little bit and all that, I'm just like, man, like it's hard to process how that, how to view that. It's amazing in so many ways and terrible in so many ways.
Well, I think if things had sort of turned out badly for me and my brothers, I might be bitter and disappointed and think it
Yeah.
was terrible. I think we certainly faced difficulties and quite a lot of shattering tragedies. But I think that one of the key things, and I mentioned this in the epilogue, is I always felt I was surrounded by a loving family and a loving community. And I think the true trauma, belongs to those who suffer without love. And I
Mm,
think that there's quite a lot of that in the world. And when I was a kid, like some of the things that I viewed as difficult were that my parents were poor missionaries.
mm,
That there wasn't a lot of money for heating in the wintertime, or even 2 years where they couldn't send us to school. Even like a missionary school didn't cost all that much. There wasn't
I
enough
mean,
money for
I
that.
can't imagine what your dad's family, and I don't know, like that dynamic is like. Cambridge went to Harvard, and you're like, you're living,
Oh, his mother thought he was wasting his life,
Oh, can't
and
imagine. Like,
basically disowned him. I mean, literally disowned him because she thought that he was crazy because he was hearing from God.
yeah,
Only crazy people hear from God, and then
yeah.
throwing away all his education. And he and my mother, worked, doing things as best, following the call that they felt they had and doing the best
Mm,
they could. But there was, I remember, and I write about it in the book. I just thought it was embarrassing, like to tell my friends that I couldn't go to school. But
yeah,
again, like those 2 years where my mother homeschooled us, not out of any ideology that schools are bad, homeschool's good. It was more there just
yeah,
was not money.
yeah.
I learned that I could teach myself anything if I had books. And so in
Oh, yeah.
retrospect, I actually have this sort of tremendous sense of gratitude that sort of set me on a course for learning later on in life.
Oh, we're gonna get into that. If anybody cannot use because you can't use that excuse of, I mean, Jonathan went to college in the states, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, highest honors, has a MLit, and was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. I mean, you can't say like you can't look at your educational path and say like, well, that guy's not gonna be able to like make it in the academic world post high school and all that. I mean, it's incredible. Like some of the things you've accomplished. So
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, and I read about it a little in the book, but the hospital Ramon y Cajal is named after Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who was the first Spaniard to win a Nobel Prize in the sciences and medicine. And at the entrance to the hospital, you see it going out, not coming in. There's a quote that says, "Every man can become the sculptor of his own mind if he sets himself the task." And so every time I'd go visit my friends in the hospital, I'd see that quote. And
yeah.
that was like the quote that inspired me. So every time I'd go visit Raul and my friends in the hospital, I'd see that quote. And I decided that I was going to become the sculptor of my own mind. And I think of like the biblical parable of the talents, which is
Oh
like
yeah.
some people get more, some people less. And the real question is not so that you have a lot or very little, but what do you do with what you have?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and you had it, and that gift was already with you, and it didn't matter the path you took to get there. I mean, it's incredible, like for sure. Um, can we talk for a minute about, I mean, some of the hard things with Timothy, your brother, and your mom subsequently as well?
Sure.
Like, that's a hard topic, and I mean, there's part of me hates to bring it up, but I know it's part of the book, and it's
Yes.
really an important part of your story.
Absolutely. And one friend reading the book said that he felt that it was sort of two books, and where you have the first part is sort of very innocent, and even the discussing AIDS and death. And then my brother died tragically in a car accident when we were back visiting churches in 1991. So missionaries go on what's called furlough. Some do it every 3 or 4 years, and we were doing it every 4 years.
And probably to speak about what you're doing, raise support and all that. I mean,
yeah,
which
so
is
like
even just like, oh
remind them
gosh,
that you exist, right? So
yeah,
they haven't seen you for a few years. You come back,
yeah,
you tell them what you've been doing, and so my parents would go around visiting churches. So we were back visiting the United States when it happened, and my brother died, and I was very close to him. I used to walk into school. We shared a room. He was in the bottom bunk, and I was very, very, very close to him. And so when he died in 1991, and I was 15, and I think these things are very hard no matter what age
oh for
you have
sure,
a loss, but certainly when like your identity is still being formed in a way, is who you are as a person and your beliefs and things like that. It was very, very traumatic, and we were a very tight group of four brothers, so losing Timothy was very traumatic. And I think, and then for me, that was really just the turning point in my life. It was a turning point, obviously, in the book and the story, where suddenly all the deaths that were surrounding us became that much more real.
yeah,
And so Timothy, it affected my parents. The divorce rates go up a lot after a child dies, partly because I think everyone grieves differently, in terms of the way that we deal with it ourselves and then the way we relate to other people. And it was a very difficult time for my parents and my family. And when I wrote the book, I was trying to be as honest as possible. There are quite a lot of books, particularly Christian books, which I tend to dislike because everything is sort of presented beautifully, and
yeah,
no one has any hard times, and if they do, they're immediately resolved, and
yeah,
they're sort of glossed over. And what I wanted to do was to try to be as honest and accurate as possible, to say that it was very difficult. There's a tremendous amount of suffering. I remember going to the pharmacy with my mother one day, and like she asked me how many sleeping pills she had to take to die. And it was like that was that level of sadness. After
it,
losing a son, where you really don't feel you want to go on. And the book is obviously this extraordinary, unique story, and most people don't grow up around heroin or AIDS. But I think that everyone grows up with some loss in their lives. It may not be like me losing a brother, but everyone at some stage will experience that. And I hope that the
yeah,
book can let people know that they're not alone.
yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing that. And Timothy was 10.
Yeah, it was a week before he was going to turn 10.
Yeah, and then when that happened, did y'all pretty quickly go back to Madrid, kind of end the trip and?
So we were, that was, he died July 19th. And then we were supposed to go back mid-August. So we went back about, 4 weeks, 3 weeks later
Yeah.
to Madrid. And it was really obviously quite shocking because you get home and, you're never sitting out the same number of plates for dinner again.
Yeah,
All his
gosh.
clothes are in the drawer. I found a diary I didn't even know he kept, and then you suddenly, and you get this glimpse into someone else's life that you didn't even know. He was just a wonderful kid.
Yeah. Man, I'm sorry. Well, how did that, I mean, and really impacted the family and also especially your mom? Can you kind of talk us through some of the mental health,
Yes.
struggles, if just being
Yeah.
real?
So my mother, I think she wanted to stay. She would have preferred to have stayed probably with her family. She came from Wilmington, North Carolina. She had a tight knit family. And then, immediately we're going back to Madrid. I think she found it very difficult. And one thing that I write about in the book, early on in the book, I remember very much, very vividly going to visit these homes. Because the church started out not just with the addicts who were in the program, but they're particularly the mothers. The fathers, I think, had a bit more pride and wouldn't come. But
Uh,
the church was all these mothers, and they were telling my mother about like losing a son to, shootouts with the police, or to AIDS, or, violence in the streets. And so I remember going to their homes and, thinking that we were all, just wonderful people for listening to their stories. And then I realized that, we're just like them. We've also now experienced loss. And it was, and it was through my mother's interactions with these other mothers, sort of sharing their stories and their grief and their pain, that I think was healing for both of them, or the groups, the group of mothers in the church.
Yeah.
And then there was a group in the U.S. called the Compassionate Friends, which is essentially a network for families that have lost loved ones. And my mother started corresponding with other mothers in the United States who had lost kids. And so I think that one of the key things, and I write about it in the book, but I think for me, one of the key things of reading is to know that we're not alone, which is that you can read stories of other people who've lived through sort of what we've lived through, or even if the circumstances are different, the universal experience of love and loss. But I think also just at a human level, being able to go have a cup of coffee or tea, or see someone who's also experienced that. And I think that people who've suffered or lost, there's like a special bond of empathy that's there.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's compassion to and love to the highest form. Just being present,
Yeah.
listening, letting share. Yeah, man. And then and obviously it hit everybody hard, but then your mom as well. Just had a lot of mental struggles from it.
Well, so my mother, I would say the first year or two, certainly 3, were very difficult. What is extraordinary is I do think my mother sort of came back from it, and she lived a wonderful life. And we were 4 boys, and I always felt a bit bad that she didn't have a daughter, and we were pretty rowdy and difficult at times. And I remember asking her once, like, if she wanted a daughter, and I don't know if she was honest about it or not, but she's like, well, I don't know what I would have done with a daughter. I've gotten used to you for. But there was a women's drug rehab center, and a lot of the women really did become like daughters to her. And I think she had a wonderful friendship with them, sort of as a mother. And then she at the very end of the book, in the epilogue, I talk about she had a very large brain tumor taken out in 2009, and that was really, I think, what caused she became very depressed afterwards, because she had lost overnight the ability to sort of read and speak, even though she was all there mentally. It's like the inability to access words. It's called aphasia. She suffered very heavily from aphasia, and before she used to read like War and Peace and Emma and a lot of books, her favorites. And then she struggled to read glossy magazines after that, trying to put those together. And so that really affected her. And then, I'm not doctrinaire about it. Everyone should make their own medical and psychological choices. But I do feel that, my father and myself too, tried to do what we could to help her. And, psychologists were trying to put her on antidepressants and SSRIs. And the problem there is that they have side effects. They can make you more anxious. They can lead to suicidal ideation. And then the other problem is, if you're getting 1 or 2, they can have interaction effects, because you might know how each one behaves on its own, but you don't know how they behave together. And so there's like some pretty big pieces that the Wall Street Journal has done recently, and one of them is on like the increase in suicide among U.S. veterans. And the thing that they point out, if you go read these long articles, is exactly that, which is, the average veteran who's like committing suicide is taking about 5 pills. And so you're getting with all these interaction effects that are happening. And so I do genuinely believe that my mother would be with us had she not been on some of these pills, because they created all sorts of terrible side effects. But I think for most of her life, up until the brain tumor, she actually, I think, had done a tremendous job of overcoming, and not that you ever overcome the loss of a loved one, but overcoming at least the intense grief that follows it, and helping others. And then when she died, there were 1,500 people who came to the service in person in Madrid, and then there was like another 1,000 IP addresses tuning in from around the world, watching it live. And you could see there a life well lived.
Fruit. I mean, I was just thinking that's fruit.
Yeah.
It's a fruitful, abundant life. Like,
Yeah. So there's a young man I didn't even know, and he came up and hugged me. He was in tears, telling me, he said, "I didn't know your mother well, but like she gave me back my parents." And
Wow.
what more could you ask for?
Yeah.
Having that effect on people.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Um, let's talk about when you graduated, because I want to hear kind of your educational path too, because it's fascinating. Because I've never talked to, you know, like, I mean, especially the Rhodes Scholar process and all that. But like, first, you graduated. Did you leave Madrid, and that's when you went to North Carolina, or is there
Yes.
some transition in between
No,
somewhere?
no.
I mean,
I
you're
went
kind
to a
of on
very
your own, I guess,
small.
huh? Like,
Yeah, I went to a very
18, go.
yeah, and particularly I think for missionary kids, like your family's often very far away. It's not like even in the U.S., you might go to another state. It's pretty easy to fly home. When you're, my parents were still in Madrid. I'd go back for Christmas and a little bit in the summer, but it was a long way away. And if I like Thanksgiving, I'd go visit my grandparents, not my parents, because it was just closer in Wilmington. But I was 90. It was in 1994, and I went off to college. The high school I went to, there were 8 kids in my graduating class, my little missionary school. And I knew I wanted to do well academically, and I had sort of the quote of Ramon y Cajal in my head. And my older brother, David, was very, very kind. And he gave me all his college textbooks for like the first 2 years. And so I studied them and ended up taking about 10 advanced placement tests before I got to college. So I was able to like place out of almost like 2 years of college when I got there, because like I'd already read the freshman chemistry book, or I'd already done his micro and macroeconomics textbooks and things like that. So when I got to college, it really freed me up to take whatever classes I wanted, because I had already done almost all the elective and requirements classes. And but it was very sort of lonely, solitary time, in the sense that I knew that my friends, were sick and dying, and I couldn't go back and see them. And so and I felt very isolated. And so I really poured myself into my books and into my studies, as a means of escape, and the sort of the solace and consolation of books. And that was really my experience. And I was pretty maladjusted in many ways, I sort of obviously like blonde hair, blue eyed, sound American, and so if someone met me across campus, wouldn't know anything, but like I was like totally out of a fish out of the water. Like I came from Madrid, which had like 4.5 million people, to Chapel Hill, which is like 30,000 people in the town, and I really did feel at a place. And it was only really at the very end, when I started becoming good friends with a lot of my professors, and then encountered some degree of academic success, that I felt a bit more settled there. And now I look back sort of fondly on my time there, but I actually like hated the first couple of years.
Well, God, you were coming from 11 years, you know, in the complete 100% completely different lifestyle and location. And I mean, everything, context, culture, everything. So, wow. I guess you probably
Yeah.
didn't get much coaching before you head over to. I'm assuming it just kind of, you go.
Yeah, it was very solitary. And also, like, at Chapel Hill, I remember they had this scholarship called the Moorhead Scholarship, and it's modeled on the Rhodes. And so like my counselor, she's like, well, you obviously have like tons of advanced credit. She's like, how in the world are you not like a Moorhead Scholar? Why aren't you like in the honors program? It's like, I didn't even know anything about this. Like I just was
Yeah.
totally ignorant of like college life. And I had to sort of, I thought, okay, well, if this is a bureaucratic maze, I'm going to figure out how this works. And thank God that there were quite a few very kind souls who adopted me, professors. And it was only recently when I realized I waived my rights when I applied for the Rhodes to read their letters of recommendation, so they could write honestly. But obviously when they passed away, then like the Rhodes House, as part of like researching the book, let me read their letters. And it
Oh,
was
how
just like,
cool.
I owe them so much. Just wonderful, wonderful people who just really looked after me, and wrote my honors theses with them, and I think that that's part of life, which is that we're all where we are because someone helped us along the way.
Oh, how cool is that? So graduated there. Did you go to Oxford right after that?
Yeah, yeah. So in 1998 was when I graduated, and then the Rhodes selection was December '97, the first week of December, and then I
Now,
got to Oxford.
talk about that for us who may not know much about it at all, like the
Okay.
process and the competitiveness of it. And
Yeah, so and a little bit comes out in the book. I won't spoil it, but like it's a very competitive process. It's changed a little from the days when I was there, because they just sort of simplified the selection process. But back when I was applying, it was a two-tier process where basically you had to, like, many hurdles to jump through. So you had to get your university to nominate you, right? And then the university presidents nominate a very limited number of people. And then they would nominate you to go to the state selection. And so, I had to go via North Carolina because I didn't, you can either pick your home state. So let's say you grew up in Maine, then you go to Chapel Hill, you could pick Maine, or North Carolina. I had no state. I mean, Spain.
Yeah, you were North Carolina.
So I was definitely North Carolina. And so then the university nominated me, and that was competitive. I think they were 25 kids, and these are all very bright, ambitious kids. And the university nominated, I think, 7 people that year. And then they nominated me in North Carolina. And then the state then gets tons of nominations. And then they have to invite people. And so I think there were like 8 or 9 people who went to the state interviews. And then you're interviewing there. And then the state can nominate 2 people to the final, right?
Oh my
So you're getting
gosh.
100 finalists into regions. And I was very fortunate that the state picked me as their nominee for the final. And then I went to the finals. And then in the finals, I think there were about 10 people there for the finals. And this was like Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and that sort of mid-Atlantic region. And then I was there. And then in the final, they picked 4 scholars. So you had 8 regions, 32 scholars in the US. So when you do the odds from just trying to get your university to nominate you, to get through to the state, to then get through to the final, to then get one of the 32 US, I worked it out. It's basically, it's less than 1% chance.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. That's amazing. Wow.
And so
that is really cool.
The interviews themselves are a lot, mainly former, or not former, you're not former ever, but you're like the older Rhodes Scholars. And then, some big notable non-scholars.
So they're just trying to crush you anyways, like.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, that's what I always thought. And even when I was writing the book, I thought that. And then there was the one judge who was extraordinary. And I wrote up my experiences and sent it to him because, I did a lot of research and fact checking for the book. And so I said, this is my memory of it. Is this
is this accurate? Like, yeah.
And so he wrote back. He said, "Well, it's accurate in many respects." He said, "But I think you have a very different perspective when you're a judge than when you're a candidate." And he said the judges are actually trying to help you do well.
Really?
Meaning they ask you very difficult questions, but in their view, and what he told me is I want to give you the ability to shine. He goes, obviously you can fail, but he's like, I'm going to ask you very tough questions, and then you can show us what you know.
Oh, wow, that's a totally different perspective. I know, that's not the way I was seeing it. Oh, that's cool. Well, when this comes out, and we'll have a few more questions, but when this comes out, what's the best way somebody can grab a book? Because the book will be out.
It'll be pretty much everywhere.
Just everywhere.
Ask your local bookstore, or order on Amazon if you like. Whatever your preferred way of buying books is.
Just grab it, because this is, I've seen some of the comparisons to other memoirs, and it is really, really good, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you.
It is super, super good, and it is very well done, and it is worth reading.
Thank you.
But a few more questions. If there was like a person who was really going through a lot of suffering right now that needed some encouragement, kind of based on your history, what would you say to them?
Well, it's interesting. As I wrote the book, at the very last stages, the legal department at Little Brown asked me to go through and contact a lot of people in the book, find out, are they okay being in the book? And I'm so glad they did, because it really, one, sent me down memory lane, and then 2, actually there were some people I'd lost touch with, and some of the kids I'd lost touch with, and I didn't even know that some of the addicts, when they died, who were like older brothers, their kids didn't have any memories of them because they were so young when they died. But one of the people, and sorry, this is a long introduction to answer your question.
No, keep
One
going.
of the people I got in touch with was the doctor, Dr. Luis Buffon in Madrid, who ran the infectious diseases ward at Ramon y Cajal.
Oh, wow.
And he's not a Christian, where my parents were. So
Yeah.
obviously he has like a different, approach to faith and to, other things. But he read the book and he said, I think we were both on the same train in different carriages looking out on the same landscape. And he
Oh,
said that a lot of the patients that came and that he and his colleagues worked with lived a little bit longer than other patients. He said, and people always asked him why, right? Because he said that any doctor can dispense medicine. He said, so the question
yeah.
is, what's the secret? And he said that there were three things that he tried to do, and it made me realize that a lot of Battelle was very similar, which is, one, he said the most important thing was for addicts to realize that they were not alone.
Mm.
And two, that they had dignity, that you aren't an outcast, you aren't a pariah, you aren't different, that you have value. And then the third was, even if you can't live a life of quantity of days, he said you can live a life of quality. And I think that when you're, that was a very important insight to me. But one of the things I end the book with, and it appears throughout the book in terms of suffering, is my mother. I remember, there was one addict who used to squeeze my hand and hurt me a lot. And when he lost weight, I once asked him, like, well, what would you think if I squeezed yours and hurt you?
Yeah.
And my mother got after me and she said, Jonathan, never harden your heart. She said the answering to suffering is always more love. And I think to those who are suffering, I would say that the answer is always more love. Whether it's, loving those who are suffering, or if we've lost people, we can certainly, treasure the memory of them. And that I think is, the approach that my mother and family have taught me. And
wow.
clearly other people might have different perspectives, what the answers might be. And I don't pretend to tell anyone what to think, but I hope at least that some of these things are useful to readers as they suffer, to know that they're not alone and they have dignity.
It's super helpful. And there's so much just truth in there and little bits and pieces. Like it's helpful. It's encouraging. And I mean, this is a little bit of a, this is kind of, all this is surprise questions. I didn't give you anything we were going to talk about, but if there was a life message maybe currently that you had and an encouragement to people, how would you verbalize that?
Well,
And this is just currently, it doesn't have to be the you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, what I just said is quite interesting because, like,
Yeah.
A lot of people who've read the book, people I know and strangers, tell me that's that paragraph where in the epilogue where I quote from my mother in the hospital is one that almost everyone sort of highlights or tells me they love. And I really do think that the reason why people respond that way is I do think the answer to suffering is more love. And I think that a lot of our problems that we have in life and society would not necessarily go away, but certainly be helped if we all had a little bit more love towards others, and not necessarily people just like us, right? But like love for people that we might not like, and
or avoid. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
That's good. Is that the reason you wrote the book?
Not initially, no. The real reason I wrote the book was that I was working at a hedge fund in New York, and I was living on the Upper West Side. And one weekend, I went into, I think it was Barnes and Noble, but there was a beautiful book with a great cover called "Flying Over 96th Street." Memoir of an East Harlem White Boy. And I thought the title was great and I got to read it. And it was about a young kid, Tom Weber, whose parents were pastors and moved him into East Harlem in the 50s to work with poor people. And it was this beautiful book about East Harlem and his friends. And I just thought, no one's done this for my friends in my neighborhood. And my neighborhood is disappearing, and a lot of my friends have died. And so that was the impetus, which was to tell my friends stories and hope that their lives might be a blessing to others. And so that was the impetus for it. I think to the extent that the book has some universal truths or things that touch readers, I certainly hope so. And that's a bonus. But that wasn't like the reason I set out to write it. But I'm glad that it does touch people.
Oh, for sure. How long did it take you? I'm just curious. Like, what was the process of this? Because, man, it was well put together too. Like you don't just throw that up in a day or two,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was working at a hedge fund, and then I like started a couple companies. I run an investment fund now. So this is like being a writer, not like, or at least
Yeah,
memoirs or literary work is not what I
yeah,
do. Like I've written some economic books,
yeah.
but it's very different. But so I had to write evenings and weekends, and so it took me about 3 years to finish the first draft and then send it around. And it got quite a lot of rejections, as is common in the publishing industry. But I realized the problem was all my writing historically had been essentially academic in terms of
Yeah.
history and economics, whether it's honors theses or my
Oh.
Oxford dissertation. And writing a memoir, while it is real, like these things happened,
Oh, man.
the way of writing a memoir has to be novelistic, right? Which is that you have to tell a story that draws readers in, and you have to do it with a very strong literary voice, right? Who is this person that's carrying you by the hand now for the next 300 pages, right?
Mm.
Like, do you want to hear this voice in your head?
Yeah.
And so I had to go back. As I mentioned, I'd started a couple companies. So I just put it on the back burner, left it in 2008, not to touch it. And it was only about 3 years ago that a mentor of mine told me, he said, you really should get this published before your father dies. And fortunately, my mother and father had read the early drafts, but I just thought, you know what, he's right. And so I went back, and my wife and friends know I'm like very obsessive. So I just thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it well. And so I went away and studied a lot of the best and award-winning memoirs and commercial memoirs too. I would connect with readers, even if it's not won awards. And then just started studying that, and then went back and re-edited. And so chopped out over 10,000 words, and then went.
Oh, that's
back.
heartbreaking alone too. Like,
Yeah. Well, one of the key
wow.
rules of writing is they call it kill your darlings, right? Like
Yeah.
just because you spend a lot of time writing it doesn't mean that it needs to stay.
Yeah. Oh man, that's good. That's so good. Well, thank you for making the time and doing that, encouraging people, for letting compassion come forward. And
Thank you so much.
I love the answer to suffering being more love, like, and engaging with the people who are marginalized and outcast. I mean, it's a powerful, powerful story.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. I really do appreciate it, and I hope the readers enjoy it. There's sort of sadness and humor, but a lot of strangers who've read it told me they're very touched by it, and I hope that's what it does.
For sure. Well, how can people connect with you? Well, what's just a good way to kind of follow what you're doing and, reach out, maybe email or something, just if they wanted just to connect?
Sure. So I have a personal website.
Okay.
So just they can Google Jonathan Tepper.
Okay.
And I have there's a contact form there. I used to be on Twitter, Facebook, and got off those years ago. So
that's why you can write a book, like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I find it prevents distractions. I am
For
on
sure.
LinkedIn, but I tend to reserve that more for like professional stuff. But
For sure.
I do enjoy interacting with readers and.
Yeah. So jump on the website and fill out the form and all that. So.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. We're looking forward to watching Shooting Up, spread and let people get reading it. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Josh. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you for joining us on this latest edition to the Storyfield podcast. We hope that you have been challenged, inspired, and ready to take that next step, whatever that is. If you know someone with an amazing story that needs to be heard, send us an email at info@thestoryfield.com. Have a fantastic day, and we can't wait for you to join us on the next episode of The Storyfield.